people just like me and you who own a couple properties and just trying to make ends meet. We're not these big, huge landlords out there. And to me, the biggest success stories have been when I've gotten phone calls from people who are literally in tears saying how this has changed their lives.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host, Adrian Danila. The special guest we have today in the studio is Yonah Weiss. Yonah, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Adrian. I can tell you I am excited. So thank you for inviting me.
I'm super excited. This was a long time coming. You're also known as the Cost Segregation King. Why is that?
Well, it's really a self-proclaimed title, but the truth be told, I've been educating people around this subject of cost segregation for the past 7 years or so, to the point where, everyone kind of says my name is synonymous with this, crazy tax strategy, cost segregation. So that's why. I mean, I'm just, no one is more prolific than I have been about this subject. So they've titled me, or I self-proclaim myself as the king.
Is branding, and I also love the self-confidence. I also love the fact that you're the very first person that I heard from when it comes to cost segregation. And honestly, I still need to learn some more. During our conversation, I like to give you ample time to cover this topic and just educate our listeners that might not know enough about it and what are the benefits of it.
Absolutely. So, mission accomplished, right? You heard about cost segregation from me, and I think that says a lot.
Yonah, a little bit about your background. Share whatever you would like with the audience for a couple of people out there in the LinkedIn world that don't know you and the podcast world.
Sure. So my background, as you can see, is a brick wall. That's just a joke. But we started out as a teacher for many years, and about 9 years ago now, got into the real estate space, kind of by accident, because I was really looking for not a new profession per se, but something that would add more income and more wealth to my family, because we were struggling. I'll be honest. We're in a kind of low point, had a medical emergency in my family, and it really put me in a lot of debt, and besides the student debt that we already had, I was between, as they say, like a rock and a hard place, and needed something to kind of get me out of that, and reached out to a bunch of different friends and acquaintances to see what I could do. Teaching has always been my passion, but I realized, it wasn't fitting the bill. It wasn't covering, rent or, expenses, food. It was crazy. It was really a tough time. Real estate kept coming up in conversation whenever I reached out to different friends and acquaintances. And it just so happened I ran into an old friend of mine. I mentioned to him I was looking for an opportunity. He mentioned to me that he was in the real estate space. He was a commercial mortgage broker, also owned several multifamily properties that he self-managed. And I was like, okay, I don't really know the first thing, but he was, gracious enough to invite me to sit with him and essentially apprentice him and learn from him. And sat in his office, 4 or 5 days a week for about 9 months, literally, and just learned everything there was to know about commercial real estate. And that was an amazing experience. And that really was how I got started in the real estate space. And then, after a couple of years of doing various different things, from mortgages to hard money lending to residential brokering, fix and flips, a lot of things, and networking, which is really the main thing. I ended up finding this company, or rather they found me, Madison Commercial Real Estate, Madison Specs, which is the branch of that company that is the biggest cost segregation company in the country. And I, didn't really know much about it at the time, but I was interested in opportunity. They were looking for someone in business development, and it was a perfect fit at the time. And that's kind of how I got started.
As I mentioned, you're known as the cost segregation king in the real estate world. For those of us who might not be too familiar with the term, can you explain what cost segregation is and why it's such a powerful tool for real estate investors?
Yeah, it's a really powerful tool, and it's a really weird name for this tax deduction. Okay. Essentially, what it is an advanced form of depreciation. So, depreciation is a income tax write-off, a deduction that you get anytime you buy a property. So besides for your primary residence, any type of property, whether it's investment or business property, is eligible to take this write-off, essentially saying you can write off the entire value of your property over a certain number of years. So residential properties, it's over a 27.5 year period. For commercial properties, it's over a 39-year period. So these arbitrary numbers, but essentially says you can literally take a little deduction every single year and write off the value as if it were going down in value. So important to note, depreciation from a tax perspective is just a borrowed term. It doesn't actually mean that your property is going down in value. It just means that the IRS is going to give you this tax deduction as if it were going down in value. So that in of itself is huge. And we talk about real estate investing and the tax benefits that come along with it. Well, depreciation is the biggest one. And cost segregation then takes depreciation to a whole new level. Okay, so let's just break down what the word means, right? The phrase cost is the cost, the value of your property. You buy a property for $1 million, that's the cost. Okay. Segregation, we're segregating or we're breaking down the property into different categories. So certain things, right, like the structure of the property, that's what really has that long depreciation of 27.5 years. And it's based on when the property was purchased or placed in service and not when it was built. So again, this is really, it's a borrowed term because it's based on you, the taxpayer. When you buy a property, you get to start this whole clock, this whole schedule over brand new. And cost segregation breaks it down from structural to things that are non-structural, like personal property, things like furniture, fixtures, appliances, window treatments, carpeting, flooring, cabinets, countertops. All that stuff that's inside your property that's non-structural depreciates on a 5-year schedule, which means we can now take the value of those deductions over that 5-year period at a faster rate. And this can be extremely significant, which ultimately leads to bigger deductions during the early years of ownership. And that creates more cash flow as an investor that you can, instead of paying taxes, use to reinvest. And so that's why you ask, why is this such a powerful tax tool or strategy? It's for that very reason. This is a tool to create cash flow for someone who's an investor who wants to lower their tax burden and use their own money to reinvest and buy more.
I'm curious, how does this affect the event of selling an asset? Let's say that you're using this tool throughout the time that you're owning property, and at some point you're selling. How does that affect that event when you're selling? I guess there's different approach on depreciation.
Absolutely. So anytime you sell a property, you are going to be subject to a tax called depreciation recapture tax. Okay. And it's similar to capital gain, which everyone understands that if you sold a property at a profit, you're going to be taxed on that difference between the purchase price and the sale price. That's called capital gain tax. Depreciation recapture is an unrealized gain, meaning it's similar. You've taken these deductions during the years of ownership and now are going to be taxed on however much of those deductions were taken. So it is something you have to be aware of. It's definitely, like I said, a strategy that helps you during the years of ownership, creating more losses or more deductions. But then on the sale, you're going to be subject to this tax, which it's different. And I'm very careful with my words saying you're going to be subject to this tax because it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have to pay that tax. Okay. Legally, there are many ways to either defer or eliminate or offset those taxes. And so it is important to understand the rules behind investing and the rules behind tax savings and how to use depreciation properly.
Can you share with us a memorable success story where cost segregation significantly impacted a client's business?
For me, the most significant things are when they are individuals who are struggling and really using the tax savings to make a difference in their personal lives. So yes, we have clients who are REITs and large, huge, multi-billion dollar corporations and things like that. But we have a lot of clients who are just people just like me and you who own a couple of properties and just trying to make ends meet. And we're not these big, huge landlords out there. And to me, the biggest success stories have been when I've gotten phone calls from people who are literally in tears saying how this has changed their lives. And I'll share one example. I'll share two examples, actually. One was a couple who lived out in California. Both were very high-paying professionals. They W-2 earners. They're making high six figures each, and were being hit with over 50% taxes. So living in California, they were barely. I mean, they lived somewhat comfortably, but they weren't really saving a tremendous amount for retirement, and it was difficult because they were very busy and working like full-time jobs. So very, very hard. they found out about what's called the short-term rental loophole, meaning they started self-managing a couple Airbnbs, short-term rentals that they had bought, and it was making cash flow and it was actually good investments. But it also came with this huge tax benefit of cost segregation. And they ended up using that and were able to, because of the rules with short term rentals, you're able to use that to offset your active or your W 2 income as well. And so they were able, the wife actually was able to retire from her job and only with the one income from the husband and her managing, I think at that point, maybe three Airbnbs, they were making more money after taxes because of this tax strategy. And they were the most happy they'd ever been because they had so much more free time, so much more time to spend together, and were really kind of doing what they loved and passionate. And so that to me, that's amazing because you can to have someone who at in their 40s who was like burning out and then was able to retire and really do what they loved and making more money than they were working full time, being stressed out and burnt out. That to me was a huge success story. A second story in a similar vein, but just a guy who was a broker, very successful realtor in his county. His team was like the top brokerage in his county, and year after year, so he was making seven figures, and he was literally he came to me, he was paying $300,000-400,000 in taxes. It was like a crazy amount, and he was like, "What am I going to do?" He heard Tom Wheelwright. He heard this book, Tax Free Wealth. Who was Tom Wheelwright? Great book. It's all about. He was actually the rich dad, rich dad poor dad, tax advisor. And in the book, he talks about depreciation and cost segregation. And then through that, he was doing Google searches and came across the Cost Seg King and reached out to me and he's telling me, Yonah, listen, I paid $400,000 to the IRS last year. Like, I don't want to pay that much money. Like, what can I do? And he also owned investment properties. So I was like, wait a second, you're a realtor, you're a real estate professional, and you're owning investment properties. He never heard of cost segregation? No, he never heard of it, which is incredible because to me, it's so powerful. Yet every single day, I still meet a lot of people out there who have never even heard of it, let alone understand it or use it, which means that there's just so much more work to do. And so this guy went from paying 400,000 in taxes to buying a multifamily property and using the bonus depreciation and literally paying zero in taxes that year. So he was making seven figures and paying zero in taxes. And to me, that was yes, okay, that's a success story because to me that's someone who's using the tax code for what it was meant for and being able to keep their own money and use that to reinvest and create wealth for themselves and their family that will really be generational wealth.
Besides cost segregation, what are other pieces of advice that you have for people that are buying on their own and investing in real estate to help them keep more on their earnings? I'm asking this question because you often say it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep.
Absolutely. Education is the biggest factor because, like we said earlier, people don't even know what's out there. Like people don't know what cost segregation is. And there are a lot of other things out there that people don't know. So listening to podcasts like this, reading, going on forums and things like that, there's so much information out there for free. But the one thing that I would say is when it comes to taxes, people kind of rely on their accountants to do their taxes and to make them aware of different deductions or things that are out there where unfortunately the majority of accountants that I have come across are not tax strategists, meaning they're not going to be proactive to help you save money. They're going to fill out the forms and make sure that you are compliant and paying the amount of taxes that but they're not going to go out of their way and tell you about strategies like cost seg, like necessarily 1031 exchanges and other types of deductions, making sure that you're keeping track, bookkeeping of all of your business expenses. You can write off so much if you have a real estate, if you own properties and there's so much that you can write off legally. And so you just want to make sure that you're not overpaying taxes due to your accountant's either laziness or ignorance or a combination of both, because you have to be proactive. So the biggest advice I can have is be proactive with your own money and your own wealth building, and don't rely on other people like financial advisors. And don't rely on them. Like, figure it out, learn on your own, and figure out what's best for you, because you really a lot of these people have sometimes their own interests first and your interest second. And so be careful.
What would you say are some common misconceptions that real estate investors have about tax savings, and how do you help them overcome those misconceptions?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that people don't think it applies to them. They don't necessarily know that it's even available or opportunity. One big misconception regarding cost segregation is that you have to do it in the first year you own the property, and if you didn't do it, then you missed out, and that's just simply not true. You can actually do it if you've owned a property for a number of years. You can go back and do a cost seg without having to amend your tax returns, and you can catch up missed depreciation, and that's a huge thing because yeah, you may not have heard of it, but now you're hearing about it today and what's stopping you from utilizing those tax savings. Another big misconception is actually it's for everyone's benefit to know who can use the depreciation deductions the most. And this, unfortunately, there are rules regarding what's called the real estate professional status, and they're people who are in the real estate business are treated differently than someone who is not in the real estate business, which means that you can actually use the deductions to offset your active or W 2 income or anything like that. Whereas if you are not a real estate professional, you're limited and you can only use this depreciation or these cost segregation deductions to offset your rental or your passive or your real estate income. And so there is that big limitation. There are a lot of misconceptions surrounding that, with people saying, oh, I'm just going to buy a property and then I won't pay any taxes. It sounds too good to be true. It probably is.
I want to go into some personal insights. You've been a guest on over 300 real estate podcasts.
We're over 500 at this point. It's crazy, just the amounts. I'm doing like almost a podcast a couple times a week for the past 5-6 years. So it's been a lot.
The ones you've been a guest on?
Correct.
Oh wow, that's beyond remarkable. That's mind blowing. That's amazing. You also have your own podcast. You just surpassed 400 episodes, so congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you were, I think, number 398, maybe a three, something around there.
First question is, what motivated you to start your own podcast, and why are you investing so much time into not just your podcast, but being a guest on other people's podcasts? What are some benefits from doing that?
There's huge benefits, and I'll talk about a couple of them. There's a lot, but for me personally, building a business and building a personal brand is huge, and social media plays a very important role in doing that. Creating a brand, like you can introduce me as the cost seg king, people know me as that, and so the more you can get yourself out there and promote your brand, but doing so as I like to do so in an educational way, not in a sales way, because there's a big difference between sales and marketing. And marketing is the cornerstone to every business. And it sounds kind of cliche, but what I mean by that is getting your brand out there so people know who you are, what you do, and they will come to you when they need that or refer, people to you because of your expertise. And being a podcast guest, I found, was actually how I got started. So I started guesting on podcasts kind of by accident. I was invited and I didn't really know what a podcast was at that point. But someone invited me to be a guest. We talked about cost seg, and then I got invited to another one because I used social media combination between being a guest on the podcast and then posting about that. And that got the word out there to other podcast hosts that were looking for, an expert on a subject matter to speak about. And so that kind of snowballed and, kept going until, like I said, at this point, 500 guest spots. But what that does is it gets your awareness out there to a greater, reach. And that's so much fun for me. But another important factor is the opportunity of just having those relationships with the hosts. So the hosts of the podcast. So I'm not a guest on, podcasts. Very few podcasts out of the real estate world. There have been a few, but for the most part, it's within that world. And so I'm creating a community. I'm creating solidifying relationships with these people, and the networking that happens through being a guest or being a host on the podcast between the two, conducting that interview, that just solidifies that. And that's one of the things that I love the most.
What's the most surprising lesson you've learned from interviewing top minds in the industry?
Wow. I've been around a while, so I don't get surprised too much. But I think one thing that has surprised me is just the book. So I ask everyone for a book that's given them a paradigm shift. That's one of the questions I ask all my guests. A lot of the same things, especially in real estate, people are talking about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and, Who Not How, we discuss that, and many, many books that are about mindset and things like that. But, every once in a while, someone will throw out a book that's just completely off topic or something that, and I try to, and it's very difficult because I'm such a long list at this point, but I try to, check out all the books that people mention. I have a huge list. I haven't gotten to all of them, but I've been literally like just shocked by some of the books. And one that really stood out to me the most was a friend of mine mentioned on the podcast a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is a German philosopher. Really incredible book. He brings from a lot of the Eastern religions and stuff like that too, but it's just a very powerful book. And that to me, I'd never heard of it before. And then, someone mentioned it and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And it's been a huge paradigm shift for me also.
Yeah, this is a book that one of my good friends recommended it. I'm ashamed to admit that I haven't read it yet, but I think this is going to be the motivation for me to look into it, like to really put my hands on it, or at least get the audio version. As a lifelong learner, which you seem to be one, what are some of the latest trends or innovations in a real estate or tax strategy that excite you the most?
Innovations, we always talk about technology and the change of technology, assistance of AI and those kind of things. I've seen it have a role, in business in general, whether it be from, marketing, using, to get ideas for content and things like that. But for tax savings, I really haven't seen a lot. Unfortunately, real estate, for better or for worse, is one of the most archaic industries out there, right? There's so much about it that even though there's a lot of prop tech and these new technologies and stuff coming out. I know your co-host Chris has a lot of stuff dealing with technology, but at the same time, there's so much about the industry that is just like 30 years behind. It's inspiring because it means that there's a lot of potential for change. So nothing specifically stands out to me, but yeah, that's something that I'm looking out for.
Throughout your podcast host career, you talk to a lot of investors and a lot of very successful people. What are some key qualities or habits you've observed in the most successful real estate investors that others should emulate?
One of the most successful habits that I've come across is the ability to delegate. Okay. And that is something that's huge because most entrepreneurs, most people who are starting a business start doing everything on their own. But if you really want to grow and scale, you have to learn to delegate and find the right people. That's what, the who, not how that we talked about. It's the title of a book, by the way. It talks about the ability to grow by finding other people who can, do things that you may be able to do, but your time is more valuable and spent doing other things. And so you may find someone who actually loves doing graphic design. And so you don't have to spend time right creating this, graphic that you're doing, whatever, even though, you can do it. But you may find someone who actually enjoys doing it and does it at, a fraction of the time that you do. And yes, it may cost a little money, but it's going to save you the time. And that time is so much also. So that's one of the biggest successful habits that I've found amongst, successful people. Another thing that I'll add to that is just, and we talked about this before, but the willingness to learn, because a lot of people kind of get stuck in their ways and they can't learn new things and figure out ways to change and ways to get better and to grow. And so, a growing person, a successful person is someone that's changing and willing and open to change.
Personal branding, you mentioned personal branding and the fact that it's important to you. So let's just go back to how important is this for you? Where do you put it on your priority list? How much time do you spend building personal brand?
It's very high on the list because your brand is really everything in terms of your integrity, people, how they know you, how they see you, and whether they choose to, do business with you or not. And I think that's really important when it comes to business because your image is really who you are. And so the personal brand, using social media, especially podcasting and things like this, where people really get to know you. And the more time you spend in it, the more people get to know you. And we talk about, there's this triangle of the know, like, and trust we talk about a lot. And know, which is the first one, is the most important one because if people don't know you, they can never like or trust you. And so getting yourself out there and creating that brand that people, a clear brand that people know who you are, what you do, and relate to that every time they see your name or your face. That's powerful. And that takes, it takes time. It does take, months or years to really get good at or hone down. But social media is an accelerator of that. And so you just want to make sure that you are, completely honest, right? And don't put out something out there that is not who you are, because it will come back to bite you.
I hear this often, or I see comments or like posts on LinkedIn where people are saying too much self promotion is too much. They also label safe promotion as noise, people making noise. What
Mhm.
I'm thinking, when reading those is that if you can make noise, people don't know you exist. Even person that writes that post, criticizing people that make noise, they do make noise while they're writing. What would you say if someone would say, hey, it's too much noise here in the space, like you're making too much noise? Basically that's what they want to tell you, but they're actually not
Mhm.
telling you, but they're saying, like, in general terms, well, it's too much noise on a platform.
Well, I think the best way to combat that is, first of all, you have to be always adding value. And I agree with, self promotion is not the way to do it, right? You're not adding value to people when you're just promoting yourself. So an easy substitute is just promote other people, right? It seems like counterintuitive because you're like, wait a second, I want, people to know about my business. And so why am I going to promote someone else? I'm not necessarily saying someone promote someone else who's doing the exact same thing you're doing, like competition or something like that. But what I mean by that is by building that brand, it doesn't matter what you post about, people will see you. And this is something I get a lot because yes, I'm, the Casa King and the expert in the space and talk about it a lot, go on a lot of podcasts, etc. But my actual content on social media, only about, I'd say 10 to 20% of it is on the subject of cost segregation. And people think, wait a second, that's kind of counterintuitive, right? You're what? So, but I post a lot, like every single day. So, what are you talking about? What are you posting about? It doesn't matter what you're posting about. I mean, obviously, it does matter, right? But it should be relevant. It should be adding value. And that's what I try to do. But if the branding is on, then whatever you post about, people will connect with you, will, be intrigued by you and automatically relate to what you do. And therefore you don't have to promote yourself because you're people are getting it subliminally by knowing who you are and your brand. And that's, to me, what's been amazing as people come to me. I love all the content that you put out about COSEG. And I don't put out a lot of content about COSEG, right? But for some reason, like, people make that mental connection because they see me as that leader in that space, and therefore they're automatically make that connection. And so that's, I think, the balance that you need. And so, yes, figure out ways to add value. By the way, coming back to another question you asked about, what do I love about podcasting so much? It's creating content. Like, listen, just doing a podcast, a long form podcast like we're doing now, you're creating content, tons of content, and you can put that out there. And it's adding value to your guest, right? By promoting them, adding value to your audience, to anyone who checks that out, because hopefully what they're saying has value to it, etc. And so again, you can be putting out whatever it is, and then people will relate to you if the branding is on.
You're absolutely right. I always look forward to my long form interviews because, out of about 45 minutes to an hour of content, I could basically repurpose that long form and create 7 to 10 pieces of short content,
Mhm.
either short videos or snippets of the conversation, which are as relevant as the long form, right? And not everybody prefers to, invest 45 minutes or an hour at a time. But if you just give them like snippets,
Yeah.
you open that window into the conversation that took place, and you give them a minute or two, they might be able to spare that. And if they think that there's something out there for them to, listen to, they might just go to the long form as well. Future goals. You've been a very successful individual. You're very well known in the industry, very well respected. Now, looking ahead, Yonah, what are some goals for the next 5 years for you, both personally and professionally?
I mean, my goals, I've rarely, to be honest, had many professional goals. Do the business, I, find a job, do something that I'm passionate about, I love, I enjoy, and how I can affect people. But to me, the goals are much more personal. And so for me, spending time with my kid, I have 6 kids. So spending time with them, they're getting older. My oldest is 19. They're getting to that point where, soon they're going to be kind of moving on, getting out of the house. And I want to spend more time with them. Obviously, that's an important thing for me. But another big goal that I've had and continue to have is how I can give back. And so for me, whether it's through philanthropy, like charity, I give to a lot of charities. I started my own organization many years ago, and someone else took it over, but I still support it and many other causes. So for me, how much I can give, that's to me, that's been a goal. I'd love to be able to give, more and more and more and increase that amount, that percentage every single year, which I've done over the past 5 years or so, been increasing that year by year. And I would just love to continue to do that because at a certain point, I don't have any really fancy things. I don't like buying things. Like, if I have money, I will, invest it or, give it away. And that's kind of my outlook on life, how I can help people. And even on a much smaller scale, I think, and everyone can relate to this. I love connecting people. I love helping people on just a small scale. And so this is a great acronym that a friend of mine told me, which is HOPE. Help one person every day. And if you can just do that, just one small goal, it's not a lot. One person, right? If you can make a connection, make an introduction, or even on a small scale, make someone's day by saying hello to them, right? Saying good morning, or just smiling, or making a phone call or a text or an email to someone that you haven't spoken to in a long time, and just for no reason other than just to kind of make their day. And I think that's something we can all do. And to me, those are the goals that I think about and that have meaning to me.
If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self when you were just starting out in life, you're very young, what would that be?
Wow. The best advice I think I could say was find mentors faster. And so, I definitely found them, but find them faster because that's what got me kind of fast tracked me to be successful in many different areas in life. And so I think, as a young person, we're very kind of full of ourselves in a lot of ways and kind of think we know everything, but you don't. And so, just find mentors and find people to look up to and to learn from.
We're only around for a limited period of time. Some will argue for a short period of time. How would you like to be remembered? How would you like your legacy to be?
I think what I'm doing, I think that's the legacy that I'm trying to live by, which is very powerful. Stephen Covey writes this in the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People right at the beginning about writing your own eulogy. Right? It gives this exercise that you want to do. Like, how do you exactly what you're asking, Adrian? Like, how do you want people to remember you? And I think for me, it's how I'm trying to live my best life. Being a family man, being there for my kids, helping people, right? Philanthropic and supporting a lot of charities and things like that, helping people, friends, family, etc. That's how I want to be remembered. And I think I'm putting the efforts to do that on a daily basis. So don't have a dream that one day you want to be someone or be this or that or whatever. Like, live it now. Like, do what you want to do today and try to make the changes that you need to make to become the person that you want to be.
You mentioned charities. Are there any charities that you would like to mention right here during our conversation that you want to for others to support?
I mean, there are a ton of charities. I don't know if I want to single out any single one to support, but there are so many out there, so many good causes.
Who was the most influential person in your life? The person that made the most positive difference in your life?
I think I can honestly say my father made the biggest positive influence in my life. I didn't necessarily realize it as a kid and as a teenager, but as I grew older and realized that a lot of the wisdom that I've gained has come from him. And it just, imparted in very just by being there and just by imparting different ways, I picked up things. So I definitely feel that. Yeah.
If you were to host a dinner party with three people, any three people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Dinner party. This is great. I don't think I've ever hosted a dinner party in my life. So this in itself would be a novel concept. But for me, my religion is very, very meaningful and very important to me. So I would focus on that, and I would choose some sages from the years. So I mean, I don't be cliche, by saying like Moses or someone like that, but Abraham, who was the first Jew, he was really the founder of Judaism, and I would love to him. I feel very, very connected with him more than probably anyone else from our great lineage. And then Rabbi Akiva, who was a great sage who lived around 2,000 years ago, very powerful person. And then I would go with the Ramchal. So there was a rabbi who lived in Italy in the 1700s, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who authored a book, I'd say dozens of works, who I'm very, very connected to. A lot of his works, I read them, almost daily. And so, yeah, I think I would choose those three. Very kind of random, but actually not too random, because he and Rabbi Akiva are actually buried next to each other, even though they lived, almost 2,000 years apart. They're buried next to each other in the city of Tiberias in Israel. So that's pretty amazing.
For those that are not too in tune with the situation in the Middle East, your people are coming from there. I know your heart goes out to there as well as mine. What is one message that you want to share with our audience about what's happening in Israel currently? And, what are your thoughts on that situation?
I think it's a horrific situation, but it's nothing new. Our people have gone through thousands of years of persecution. There's nothing new to it, and unfortunately, the media doesn't help with portraying Israel as as an enemy or evil in a lot of ways, which it's certainly not. And you have literally terrorists who their whole declaration of existence is the destruction of another people. I think the message is we just have to live in peace. And I don't really honestly think that will ever happen, if I'm being completely honest here, because as long as you have a culture that is steeped in violence and hate towards another people just for their simple existence, it was long before the state of Israel was founded and continues to be so, then there can and will never ever be peace. So I think we just have to pray for it. We have to try to want it and try to get along as much as we can.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to give you the opportunity to share some contact information. How can people get a hold of you? Anything about your business that you would like for our audience to know that we didn't have the opportunity to cover during this episode?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on all the social media platforms. Obviously, I'm most active on LinkedIn, but if you do so, please make a note. All right, take 10 seconds. Don't just hit that connect or follow button. Take 10 seconds and write a little note. Say you heard me on the Multifamily Chronicles podcast or the podcast with Adrian, however you want to phrase it. And that would start a conversation. You can also go and check out our website, yonahweiss.com, or our company, like we mentioned, is Madison Specs. Happy to help, happy to have conversations and see what we can do. One thing I would say is, we didn't talk too much about cost seg. Again, I have a ton of content out there about the subject, but a really important thing I always like to mention is that we offer a free feasibility analysis. So an estimate of sorts for any property. So if you're thinking about being intrigued by costing, you're just like, I don't even know what it is, what is going to make a difference. You get a free estimate and you're like, okay, wait a second. This is exactly how much money I'm going to save in taxes if I do it versus if I don't do it. And it's pretty much, a no-brainer, either yes or no at that point. So I always like to mention that, and you can reach out to me to get one of those.
Any final thoughts for our audience?
Just thank you, Adrian, for having me on the show. This has been great. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful life. Try to make efforts. Remember, help one person every day. If that person's yourself, that's also okay. You want to help yourself and make sure that you are in a positive mindset, positive state of mind always.
I wanted to say I've been fortunate to get to know you in person. You're one of the most generous people that I, genuinely generous that I've met with their own time. And I'm very appreciative of you. It's been an amazing conversation. It's been a great thing having you here today, Yonah. I hope to get you back here soon. Sometimes down the road, and maybe we could make an episode that's exclusively cost segregation to give you like ample time to explain all the ins and outs and just give you enough time, as much time as you want to explain this, because it's definitely a topic that, I need to get more educated on. And a lot of people are out there just like me.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Everybody, thank you for watching another episode of Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host, Adrian Danila. I hope to see you back here soon. Have an amazing day.